This is the live podcast with Manuel, living in full expression. Most people think that fear is the enemy of success. It is not. For many high performers, fear has been the engine, the thing that drives every achievement, every milestone, every late night push to prove something. The real problem is not that fear exists. It is that nobody ever names it. It hides behind the following counts: the partnership, the awards, the client results, the polished bio. And the bigger the success grows, the higher the fear beneath it becomes. Because now there is more to lose, more people to disappoint, more distances between the public image and the private truth. This episode is not about eliminating fear, it's about seeing it clearly, tracing it to its roots, and finally separating your identity from the story it has been telling you since long before you built anything worth being afraid of losing. Welcome to the live podcast with me, your host Manuel, and I hope you enjoyed your Easter holiday. Today on this podcast, we're going to be talking about fear. And before we begin, I want to paint a picture to you. You have built something real. People follow you. People trust you. People pay you. People look up to you and tell you that you've changed something for them. And somehow, in a quiet moment when nobody is looking, when the notifications have stopped and the screen goes dark, you wonder if they will still be there if they could see all of you. Not the highlights, not the bio, not the version you put forward. I mean all of you. The parts that are still figuring it out, the parts that are still afraid, the part that are carrying the weight nobody in your audience would ever suspect is there. If that landed somewhere real for you, then this episode is right for you. Because today we're going to go beneath the surface. We are going to name what most successful people never name. And we are going to do some work together right here, right now, that has the potential to change the way you show up in everything you have built. And so if you're ready, let's dive in. First, I want to tell you about a client I work with, and I'm going to keep her anonymous, but I wanted to hear this story because I believe something in it is going to feel familiar. Okay, so from the outside, she made it genuinely. Thousands of followers on social media, a YouTube partnership, and she had been interviewed by BBC. She's dedicated to helping young ladies in coaching them, and these young ladies are looking up to her, telling her how she has inspired them to believe in themselves. And every visible measure, she was someone who had figured it out. When I began working with this lady, and I started where I always start, beneath the surface, not with strategy, not with goals, but with honest questions. And what I found out surprised even her. Now, behind everything she had built, behind the following, behind the partnership, the interviews, the client who admired her, behind the going viral was a quiet, persistent fear of being truly seen. Not online, I mean in real life, by the people who knew her personally, by the clients who had trusted her, by the young women who look up to her. She was afraid that if they saw all of her, the uncertainty, the days things didn't work, the gap between her public image and the private experiences she's having, they would discover that she did not fully deserve the position she had been placed in. She was afraid not of failing to succeed. She was actually afraid of succeeding and then failing to sustain that success. She's not the exception. In my work as a coach, I have seen this pattern behind the facade of more successful people than I can count. The bigger the visible achievement, the more isolated the private fear. The higher someone climbs, the more they have invested in maintaining the image that got them there. And the more they maintain the image, the further they drift from the authentic, vulnerable, fully expressed version of themselves that built the connection in the first place. And high performers are often the least people anyone thinks to check on, because the success itself becomes the armor. Nobody asks the person with thousands of followers if they're okay. Nobody questions the person who just landed the BBC interview. Nobody looks beneath the YouTube partnership and says, "How are you really doing?" And so the fear lives there, unnamed, in the space between the public image and the private reality. Growing heavier with every new achievement, because every new achievement raises the stakes of being found out. And this is what I call the success trap. And today, we're going to find the exit together. All right, so I want to do something with you right now that I do with every client at the beginning of this kind of work. I'm going to ask you some questions, not rhetorical questions. I mean real ones. And I want you to actually answer them in your head or out loud, or in writing if you have something nearby to write. And you always know that I always prefer you to write because of what happens between your fingers, your hands, and your brain. So don't rush it. Just sit with each of these questions. All right. So if you're ready, let me ask you the first question. And I want you to pay rapt attention to this. Think about the people who follow you, the people who have bought from you, the paid for your time, your coaching, your services, your products, the people who look up to you and tell you that what you do matters. Now, I want you to imagine, and I want you to really imagine that they could see all of it. Not the highlights, not what you push out there. I mean all of it. The days you doubted yourself, the moment things didn't work the way you said they would, the gap between the version of you they see and the version of you that exists in private. What do you feel in that moment? And I want you to hold that image in your mind. What do you feel? What do you think? Not what you know intellectually that you need to feel. I mean, what do you actually feel right now in your chest, in your stomach, when you sit with that image? Just make it real and ask yourself, how would it feel like if people really see who I truly am? Now, if the honest answer involves fear, the fear of being found out, the fear of disappointing people, the fear of distance between your public image and the private reality becoming visible, I want you to know something important. That fear does not mean you are a fraud. Like my client I just mentioned to you, she felt she's going to be like a fraud to these people. It does not mean you do not deserve what you have built. It does not mean the people who trust you were wrong to do so. It means you care deeply about the people you serve, and it means there is something underneath the success that has never been fully examined. And that unexamined thing is quietly limiting the size of the life you're willing to live because you are afraid, because you're scared. So let me ask you something else. This might be different from what I've asked you initially. And that question is this: when did you first learn that success was dangerous? When in your life did you ever hear that? Not in those words, maybe it might not be exactly the same way mentioned. Maybe nobody said it in those words. But somewhere, at some point, possibly very long time ago, you absorbed a message that told you that reaching for something and failing was worse than not reaching it at all. That the higher you climb, the further you fail. That it's safer to stay just beneath the full expression of what you are capable of, because that way there is less at stake if it does not work out. I want you to think about that. When was the first time you heard that? Where did you first learn about that? While that thought is still in your mind, I want you to hold it. We're going to come back to it. Now, back to my client that I was mentioning to you. When I dug deeper with her, when I kept asking the question that most people stopped before, we arrived somewhere unexpected. The fear was not hers originally. She told me her mother had tried to build a business and that business had failed. And her mother, out of love out of genuine care, out of wanting to protect her daughter from experiencing the same pain, had shown her fears, not deliberately. She didn't mean it, not as a lesson, simply by living it. By the way she talked about risk, about visibility, about what happens when you put yourself forward and it did not work out. And this, my client, as a child, watching someone she loved carry that pain, observed the message, not consciously. Children never absorb these things consciously, but deeply in the part of us that forms before we have languages for what we are feeling. It was at this stage she started absorbing this fear from her mom. That message was something like, if you build something and it fails, you'll be broken by it. So be careful how much you build. Don't be an entrepreneur. Be careful how visible you become. Be careful how much people come to need you. Because if you disappoint them, you will not survive it. Now, I want you to know that her mother never said those words exactly, but the fear communicated them clearly. In fact, according to her, she said that the mother told her, it's better you get a 9 to 5 and live by it, because I've started a business and it failed. And she was having this fear. And so my client carried that fear into her adulthood, into her content, into her coaching, into every achievement, where instead of feeling pride, she felt the weight of everything she now had to sustain. Every new follower was someone else who might one day be disappointed. Every new client was someone who might one day discover the gap. The success kept growing and the fear kept pace with it. I remember telling her, I said, your mother never became someone who was interviewed by BBC, but you have. Your mother never became a YouTube partner, but you have. I gave her reasons to see that the fear of her mother is not her own story. And I want to give you an analogy that I find helps people understand what is happening in moments like this. Think about a child who watches her parent burn their hands on a hot stove. That child will flinch near stoves for years, even ones that are completely cold, because the warning was real. They saw it real time. The pain was real once. And so the body remembers and it protects automatically, without asking whether the current stove is actually hot or not. So my client's fear was the same. The warning her mother communicated was real. Her mother's pain was real. But the stove in front of my client was not hurt, just like her mother's, was not her experience. Her situation was not her mother's. Her capabilities were not her mother's. Her time were not her mother's. She had been flinching near a cold stove. And one of the things she also talked about was how she has been told she cannot, succeed in anything as a child growing up. She had the failure ideology dumped on her, and this compounded her issues. And here's the thing about inherited fears. The moment you can see where they come from, the moment you can say this fear was not originally mine, it was passed to me by someone who loved me and was trying to protect me, that knowledge changes your relationship with that fear completely. You can have compassion for the person who passed it. You can honor the love behind the warning, and you can choose consciously and deliberately to put it down, because it was never yours to carry in the first place. All right, let's do the second layer of the coaching work with you right now. This is the part of the session where we begin to separate the inherited fear from your actual identity and capability, where we start to distinguish between the story you have been carrying and the evidence your own life is offering you every single day. And I'm going to give you 3 questions, and I want you to answer all 3 of them in writing. These are not quick questions. You need to give them time because they deserve it, except you're in a place where you're not able to write. But ensure that as soon as you can, you put these questions down and answer them. Now, this is question number 1. Whose fear is this originally? You have identified the fear. You want to ask yourself, whose fear was this originally, or is this originally? Not who told it to you, not who taught it to you, but where did it come from? Where did you watch someone you love experience it and you absorbed it as warning about your own future? Take your time. This question, what it does is that it opens something people have not looked at in years. They discover that the fears they've been carrying all their lives have been the fear they absorb from people's experiences. So you want to sit with this question and discover whose fear this was in the first place. Question number 2. What evidences in your life directly contradicts this fear? You've identified the fear. You have identified where this fear is originally from. You want to ask yourself, what evidences in your life directly contradicts this fear? Like my client that I mentioned to you. She has been interviewed by BBC. She has gone viral. She's a YouTube partner. Now, these contradicted all that her mother had experienced. And these were the things I pointed out to her. So in your own case, you want to find out what evidences in your life so far that has contradicted this fear that you have. Not what you hope might be true. I mean, what is already true. You know, the people who came back, the client who messaged you and said it changed something for them. The moment something you created reached someone you never expected to reach. The thing you attempted that was harder than anyone knew, and you did it anyway. Those evidences were real. You want to write them down. All of it. Because the fear has been rehearsing its case against you for years. And your evidences deserve to be seen also. So write those evidences down. Now that brings me to question number 3. So the third question is this. Who would you be? How would you show up? What would you attempt? How freely would you create if you were not carrying this fear? So you want to sit down and ask yourself, if this fear never existed, how would I show up? What would I attempt? How would I freely create something if this fear never existed? Not a fantasy version of yourself, not perfection, just a version of you that was not spending energy maintaining the armor, the version that was not managing the distance between the public image and the private reality, the version that was not flinching near cold stoves. What would that person do differently this week, this month, this year? You know, in your next conversation with your client, in the next piece of content you created, that version of you is not a distance, it is the direction, and it is available to you. Not when the fear disappears, because the fears will not disappear just like that, but when you stop letting the fear make decisions on your behalf. So here's what happened with my client. When she completed this work, when she traced the fear to her mom, honored it, and then began to separate it from her own story, something shifted. Of course, not overnight, but genuinely. She began to show up with more of herself visible, not performing the confident version, not managing the distance. Actually, she became present. Actually, she became herself in her content, in her coaching sessions, in the conversations she had with the young ladies she's helping who looked up to her. And what she discovered, and what I wanted to hear today, is that the people who followed her didn't love her less because they saw more of her. They loved her more because they could feel the difference between someone performing confidence and someone living it. So the connection that had always been there, I mean the genuine connection between her and her audience, became deeper the moment she stopped protecting it so carefully and simply showing up from the inside out. And that's what living in full expression makes possible. Not the absence of fear, but the refusal to let the fear run the show for you. I want to close with something I need you to really hear. The success you have built is real. Every bit of it. The people who follow you, trust you, pay you, look up to you, they are responding to something genuine in you, something that was always there, something that no amount of fear or self-doubt can manufacture. But if you are carrying an inherited fear or story that was passed to you by someone who loved you and wanted to protect you from pain they had experienced, then you have been building on a foundation that includes something that was never supposed to be there in the first place. And the work of coaching, the work of this episode, the work of this entire series is to help you see that foundation clearly, to remove what was never yours and to build the rest of it on a ground that is completely unshakably your own. Because full expression, the real thing, the version we talk about on this show every single week, is not available when you are performing a version of yourself you are secretly afraid of not being able to sustain. It only arrives when you are willing to be seen fully, not the highlights, but all of it. The following, the partnership, the interviews, the clients, those are not what makes you worthy of being seen. You are worthy before any of that existed. And you will be worthy long after the metrics change. So the young woman I coached, which I've told you about, learned that. And she's still learning it. Because this work is not a single session, it's a practice, a daily choice to show up as the whole version of yourself rather than the managed one. That choice is available to you today as well. Not when the fear disappears. I mean today. And you have to take the step with courage despite the fear. All right, in closing, there are 3 things you can take from today's episode. Number 1 is to name the fear that lives behind your success. Not to shame it, but to see it. Write it down in one honest sentence. The unnamed fear is always more powerful than the named one. And I want you to trace it to its root, which is number 2. Ask yourself, whose fear is this originally? Where did I first learn that success was dangerous, that visibility was risky, that disappointing people was something I might not survive? Give the fear its correct address and notice that that address is not you. So you have to separate yourself from that address. And lastly, number 3, answer the third question. Who would you be if you're not carrying this fear? Not someday, I mean, who would you be right now if that fear does not exist this week? Name one thing that that person would do differently, and you now go ahead and do it. And if you feel that this episode was more like a coaching session, actually I intended for that to be, and that is the work. If this episode landed somewhere real for you, share with one person you believe is carrying this quietly behind everything they have built. Sometimes the most powerful thing you can do for someone is to let them know they are not the only one. And until I see you in our next episode, keep living in full expression.